We are live. Coming to you live as Lichtman Live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Hey, we're going to have a great show today. We're going to go through all the keys, tell you where they stand. So take the pundits and the polls and forget about them. You're going to get the real stuff tonight.
Yes, today is our second Where the Keys Stand Now. The first one we did, when was that? June 6th, I believe. So this is our July update of Where the Keys Stand Now, and quite an update. A new candidate in the race. I mean, that doesn't happen very often, right? Between the updates of the keys, month to month.
It never happens.
Right, right. It's literally never happened.
This is brand new.
Yeah, so we're going to get right into it. Here is the wonderful 13 Keys tracker. Shout out to the creator of the 13 Keys tracker. We love them a lot, right, Dad?
We do. That was a great service.
Hold your mic a little higher, why don't you?
All right, we love them. It was a great service.
Oh, I didn't say you needed to say that again. I just said hold your mic closer.
But, I'm allowed to say it again.
Sure. Ain't no doubt. All right, so where the keys stand now, July update, 1 month away from your prediction, the Kamala Harris edition. Let's
Correct.
get right to it. So the midterm gains key.
Before we get to that, I've got a brief preliminary statement.
Oh, go ahead.
I get a lot of emails from people who tell me they know better how to call these keys. And of course, they don't, because they're not adhering to the definition of the keys. In my book, got to read my book, Predicting the Next President, The Keys to the White House 2024, available on Amazon and many outlets. It will tell you exactly how the keys are defined, and it will give you the answers for every election from 1860. Who was elected then, Sam?
In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected.
Right, that was a long time ago.
That was a long time ago.
Things were very different then, but the keys held since 1860. And so the book will give you the answers, and the next answer has to be consistent with how the keys have been answered from 1860 to 2020, 160 years of our politics. You're free, anyone is free to develop their own system. And, it could be a keys system or any other system, and you could evaluate your criteria any way you choose. But if you are going to be consistent with the keys system, you have to stick with the internal definitions of the keys and the way the keys have been answered. You can't freelance. You can only freelance if you want to develop your own system. Is that clear enough, Sam?
Yes. Do you want to, when we go through these keys, you can give a sort of updated definition of each key? Does that work?
I think that's very important because there's a lot of misunderstanding about at least some of the keys.
Right. Let's get into it. You ready?
Ready.
The 13 keys tracker. The first key is the midterm gains key.
Right. The party holding the White House holds that key only if after the last midterm, which would be 2022, they held more House seats than they did after the previous midterm, which is 2018. Is that true or false, Sam?
False.
False. And that's locked. That doesn't change.
Okay.
The midterm elections have already been held.
Right. And just to update people, if 8 or more keys are true, then the incumbent party, Kamala Harris, wins. If 6 or more are false, then the challenger party candidate, Donald Trump, wins. Just if you didn't know that.
I always like simplest to say 6 negative keys, the White House party is a predicted loser. Fewer than 6, there are predicted winners. You're always looking for 6 strikes and they're out.
All right. The next key is key 2, the no primary contest key, which could have been in play.
Could have been in play. And remember, this only applies to the White House party. This looks at whether there was a significant contest for the White House party nomination. What goes on with the challenging party is irrelevant. To win this key, the nominated candidate has to win at least 2/3 of the delegate vote and be nominated on the first ballot of the convention. Now, I thought that this key might well be in play. And indeed, the way the Democrats were trashing Joe Biden and pushing for an open nomination, I thought they were foolishly going to forfeit this key. Didn't work out that way because Joe Biden, who knows the keys extremely well. Did you ever show that picture of myself and Biden holding up the book? If you could get that, that'd be great. He made sure that there would not be an incumbent party primary contest by uniting the party behind Kamala Harris. And already it looks like she has at least 2/3 and likely much more of the delegate vote. You know, Republicans have suggested they're going to challenge this, as if they have any right to challenge what's going on internally with the Democratic Party, claiming, oh my God, this is a violation of democracy. You know, I've been following politics since the founding, and hypocrisy is endemic to politics. But this is about the worst example of hypocrisy I've ever seen. The Republican Party challenging the Democrats because of their internal processes of being undemocratic when the party has lined up behind the only losing presidential candidate in 230 plus years of U.S. history to not accept the peaceful transfer of power. He's even said if he loses next time, he's not necessarily going to accept the peaceful transfer of power, who organized an insurrection designed to stop the counting of electoral votes and undermine American democracy, also organizing fake electors to steal an election, also being convicted of 34 felony counts, not for paying hush money, but for electoral fraud, for deceiving the voters as if this hush money payment to help his campaign was legal services.
There it is, Dad.
There it is. I don't like that look I have.
I was to say, what's that?
It's a little
with
strange.
Your face there.
Maybe I was intimidated by meeting the guy.
What do you think your notes say here? You got 1, 2, 3, 4 names written down here. What do you think you were saying?
I have no idea who those names are. But no, don't. Yeah, that's a really that's like the strangest picture of me ever.
Right.
But you can see that Joe knows all about the keys.
There you go. Okay.
So that one is, I would say, certainly blue.
Certainly. We don't even want to say likely?
No.
Okay.
I think it's a done deal.
Okay, it's a done deal. All right. The next key is a key that did change, the incumbency key,
yes.
key 3.
And again, there's a lot of misunderstanding of this. A sitting vice president is not the presidential incumbent. A sitting vice president does not secure this key. I've argued for some time in my criticism of the shameless trashing of Joe Biden by his own party that if Joe Biden's pushed out, he should resign the presidency and let Harris become president. And yes, it doesn't matter whether you are elected president or became president as a result of the resignation or death of the sitting president. You are still the incumbent and win that key. Joe Biden didn't do that. He adopted half of what I called my plan B. That is, he avoided the primary contest, but at least at this point, he's forfeited the incumbency key. So he still could conceivably resign and let Kamala become president, but I think it's highly unlikely. So what would you say, Sam? Certainly or likely? At this point, it's certainly. Okay.
Yeah, it's hard to say that he's going to somehow resign or come back. It seems highly unlikely.
Yeah.
All right. One of our big keys in the balance, the third-party key, key 4.
Yes, this key is often misunderstood as well. Third parties historically count against the White House party. They're a sign of discontent with the way the nation is being governed. You wouldn't have a significant third party if there was fairly universal satisfaction with the strength and performance of the White House party. Now, when I first developed the keys retrospectively, to be a so-called significant third-party candidate, a candidate had to win at least 5% of the vote. But I obviously don't know that in advance. So this is the one time I've got to turn to polling because there's nothing else really available, although I'll have a little bit of a codicil on that. So I don't, however, take the polls at face value. This is because of the Lichtman wasted vote syndrome theory, not the Sam Lichtman, right?
Right.
Yes. So I love you, RFK Jr., but I know you can't win, so I'm not going to vote for you. So typically, when people actually vote, third party or independent candidates get about half of their top polling. So to turn this key, RFK Jr., once his polling is stabilized, would have to be polling at 10% or more. It's possible, but I think it's very unlikely. Right now, he's all over the map. I've seen as low as 2 and as high as 12. Plus, he has a big problem. What's that, Sam? And beside
he's not on the ballot.
Not on the ballot.
in some states he is, in some states he's not.
I haven't really seen research on that, but that's another problem in terms of his being anticipated to get 5% of the vote. So I would say that one is likely blue.
Likely blue. And I think we also want to clarify, a lot of people ask this question. It is not the cumulative of third parties running. It's whoever is the leading third party candidate, what they are polling at.
Right, because these other candidates, their polling is totally unreliable. When you're polling 1 or 2%, that's too small to have any reliability.
Right. Our next key is key 5, strong short-term economy.
All right. That's a very, cut and dried key. No recession in the election year. When you read my book, you'll see I don't decide whether there's an election. Do you know who I rely on?
A recession.
A recession. What did I say?
An election.
A recession. This probably is an election.
There is an election.
Yeah, unless we're in Russia.
Right.
So.
Although, did you see the North Korean candidate? They had some election recently, and they didn't get 100% somehow.
That was a shock.
Yeah, it was a shock, yeah.
And the ones who didn't vote for him, I think, got executed.
Right.
So, I don't decide. I'm not an expert in that. I rely on the National Bureau of Economic Research, which for many, many decades has been the organization of experts who decide whether there's a recession. There's also, an independent definition of a recession, which is pretty good, and that is 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. The NBER has not come close to declaring a recession. There hasn't been anywhere close to 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. In fact, we just got the second quarter. There's a big lag in this data. We just got the second quarter growth numbers, and they smashed all expectations. 2.8% growth, much more robust than the economist had anticipated. Now, some say, you should rely on the polling. If people think there's a recession, you should turn this key. No, polling is ephemeral. It changes. The latest poll I saw, was pretty close, like 56-44. Nowhere strong enough, to consider turning the key. And, the next month it could be entirely different. So you cannot rely on ephemeral changing polls.
Or people's perception.
Or people's perceptions. That's why I have a objective standard here.
Okay.
So that one is certainly true.
Certainly true. Okay, the next one is the long-term economy key.
That's also a very cut and dried indicator. It's purely mathematical. It asks whether per capita real economic growth in the term at least equals or exceeds the average of the previous 2 terms. And by real growth, you know what that means, Sam?
No.
Adjusted for inflation.
Okay.
So it takes inflation into account. And the long-term growth under Joe Biden has been vastly greater than the average of the previous 2 terms. Not close. That one is certainly true.
Certainly true. Okay, the next key is key 7, major policy change. Can you define that?
Yes. It could be defined in 2 ways. One, a very significant change from the previous administration, or 2, a truly historic policy change like the New Deal or the Ronald Reagan conservative revolution. And clearly, policy under Joe Biden in virtually every realm has been fundamentally different from that of the previous administration of Donald Trump, whether it be the environment, climate change, immigration, infrastructure, taxes. The changes have been very significant, many of them resulting from executive orders, with Biden overturning a lot of the Trump executive orders on matters like abortion, the environment, and immigration. That one is locked in as true.
Locked in, certainly true. Looking good for the Democrats so far.
So far.
Okay.
Lot to come.
Another key that is up in the air, key 8, the social unrest key.
Again, there's a lot of misunderstanding about that key. Can't be sporadic protests like we saw this spring on some college campuses. It has to be massive protests or unrest like we saw in the 1960s or during the Black Lives Matter movement, where millions of people were out on the streets. There was a lot of violence, deaths. So far, nothing like that.
Right. Yesterday doesn't count.
Not even close.
Right.
You always have those sporadic protests.
To give context, if you don't know, but Netanyahu came to D.C., there were a lot of pro-Palestinian protesters in D.C., but again, it was a one-off day. You know, it didn't cause much turmoil, and it's over already.
Right. Nothing that threatened the stability of our society.
Right.
Now, I'm holding judgment on that key because one of the hallmarks of social unrest in the 60s was the explosion of violence and protest at the Democratic Convention in Chicago. So it seems unlikely. We haven't seen anything hardly this summer beyond, the one-off protests against Netanyahu. No recreation of the campus protests or young people's protests we saw in the spring. But I'm being very cautious and holding a final call on this key until after the Democratic Convention. I don't think that's enough social unrest.
No, not enough social unrest.
And that's when I'll make my final call, but I would say this is likely blue.
Likely blue. Wow. Looking quite good for the Democrats. I just want to say we got 8,800 people watching.
Wow.
If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. I looked at our analytics today, and 73% of people who watch our videos aren't subscribed. So if you're watching and you're not subscribed, please subscribe. You can follow him on X, Instagram, TikTok, at Allan Lichtman. Check out my YouTube channel, at Sammy Licht, and at Sammy Licht on Instagram. Let's keep going.
Don't forget donations and memberships.
And donations and memberships get priority in questions being asked. Obviously, we're focused on the key tracker, but we will get the questions after the key tracker. We get so many questions now, we can't guarantee your question will be answered. But for those two folks, donations and members get priority. Also, I turned our chat to subscriber only today. So if people like that, let me know. If they don't, let me know. All right, key number 9, the scandal key.
Yeah, again,
another misunderstood key.
One misunderstood key. Again, when you read the book and you see how it's been answered, it has to be some kind of corruption directly involving the president, and there has to be bipartisan recognition of scandal, as, for example, there was in the Watergate scandal. So it has to fulfill those criteria.
And
Biden's...
I'm about to say, a lot of people think this whole Biden age thing is a scandal.
I think people knew what Biden's age was.
Right.
I don't think it's a scandal, nor is the resignation of the Secret Service head a scandal. It doesn't directly touch the president. And as far as I can tell, that was not an example of corruption. It was an example of incompetence, which we see all the time. So that one is locked in. And, they try to find corruption on Biden for 4 years. And Republicans came up empty. In fact, their big smoking gun witness, Mr. Smirnoff, was arrested by the FBI for lying about the Biden's involvement in Ukraine and was found to be spreading what kind of propaganda, Sam?
Kiribati propaganda. No, Russian.
Russian, yes. Yeah. It's the Russians who'd love to see Biden hit with a scandal.
Right.
So that one is certainly true.
Certainly true. Okay.
Foreign military failure. A big, splashy, notable failure. And I would say, arguably, one could claim there are at least failures given the destruction in Gaza, given the bad optics on Afghanistan, given the stalemate in Ukraine. So I would say that one is likely false.
Okay, likely false. And a lot of people push back on this because they say that, Ukraine has done much better than anybody could have thought. Gaza is obviously a terrible situation, but it could turn around very quickly.
Absolutely, although it could turn around, but so far it hasn't. That's why I'm leaving it the way it is. And same thing with foreign military success. I would say that leans false because there's a big push. What have I been advocating for months that the incumbent administration should do in Gaza?
Broker a peace deal and a hostage return.
And who just came out strongly for that today?
Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris. She must be listening to this show.
Oh, I'm sure she's tuned in right now. Hey, Kamala. Wave to her, Dad.
Good to see you again.
Again. When did you see her last time?
It's been a while.
I don't think you've ever seen her. I don't think he's ever seen her.
Right. So charismatic and again, this key is also.
Wait, what about the fact that Ukraine is doing a lot better than anybody could have ever imagined?
I don't think that's been the perception. The perception is Ukraine is faltering. Russians are making advances. Maybe if we had, hit this key a year ago. But at this point, I don't think there's widespread understanding by even the experts that Ukraine is a big success. I think it is.
What if there's a split? What if they get a peace deal in Gaza, but Ukraine ends up losing?
You can get a split of these two keys. Jimmy Carter split the keys. He won the success key because of the Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt. And he lost the failure key because of what else happened on his watch?
The Iran hostage.
The Iran hostage. So you absolutely could split the two keys, and I think that could well happen.
But what about key 11, right? It's about success. All you need is one success, even if you say there's a peace deal. Automatically that turns blue, even if Ukraine loses?
Yes, but I wouldn't say automatically. Again, when I've talked about this, those who've heard our show, I've always said the devil is in the details, and I don't like making pronouncements on hypotheticals.
Sure.
So while I think that could turn the success key, I want to actually see how it comes down before making a final decision.
Okay. The two final keys are charisma keys. The first one is key 12, which is charismatic incumbent.
These keys are also misunderstood. When you read my book, you'll see it has to be one of these once-in-a-generation inspirational candidates who is broadly appealing, not just appealing to a partisan base, but appealing across party lines as well. We saw that with Franklin Roosevelt, who won 4 elections by landslides or near landslides and created a new dominant Democratic Roosevelt coalition. We saw that with Ronald Reagan, who won 2 elections in landslides. And there were a lot of Reagan Democrats. And clearly, whatever you may think of Harris, at least so far, she's not a once-in-a-generation, broadly inspirational candidate like FBR, so that one is false.
You just called him FBR.
FBR. Hey, I'm 77. Give me a little leeway.
And charismatic incumbent, that doesn't mean that they're running again. It just means that they're part of the incumbent party, right?
Right. And it's not a comparative. Doesn't mean they're more or less charismatic as compared to the challengers. It's an absolute standard, and very few candidates meet this standard. Who are some of the examples, Sam?
Oh, Obama, FDR,
Yes.
JFK,
TR, very few. Teddy Roosevelt.
right?
And I have Donald Trump as not one of those once-in-a-generation inspirational candidates, because while he's a great showman, he only appeals to a narrow base.
Right.
Whereas Reagan and Roosevelt won 6 elections by landslides or near landslides. In 2 elections, Donald Trump lost the votes of the American people by 10 million votes combined. FDR created a whole new Democratic majority, converted many, many voters, lots of Reagan Democrats. Have you found many Trump Democrats? One.
No, I was thinking.
Oh, you're thinking.
No.
So that one is clearly true.
So that one is the opposite. It goes in the favor of the party.
Right. They split.
So we have right now, and obviously some of these keys are still in play, but if they all ended up the color that they are, Harris would win, because there's 8 true, 5 falses, but there are still 4 keys. The same 4 keys are still in play, correct?
Right.
From our last update.
That's why I have not made a prediction, but I have said a lot would have to go wrong. First, it was the Democrats. Now I'll say for Harris to lose this election. I've been saying this for many, many months. And the only thing that's changed is the loss of one key, right?
The
incumbency key.
Yeah.
Other than that, the race is exactly the way it was before Biden stepping down and Harris moving in.
Right.
Yes, 3 of these 4 undecided keys could still turn. Not impossible, but not likely, not very likely. And so a lot would have to go wrong, although it could, for the Democrats to lose this election. And remember, this is an assessment based on a system that's been right in forecasting ahead of time for 40 years. No other model comes close, and that retrospectively goes all the way back to 1860, when women didn't vote, most African Americans were enslaved, we're an agricultural economy, no automobiles, no jet planes, no radio, no television. So the keys have survived. Enormous changes in our society, our politics, our demography, and our economy.
All right, so just to review, we have the midterm gains key as certainly false. The primary contest is certainly true. Incumbent re-election, certainly false. The third party key is likely true. Both the economy keys and the major policy change key are certainly true. The unrest key is likely true. Scandal key, certainly true. Military/foreign failure is likely false. Major foreign/military success leans false. Charismatic incumbent is certainly false, and uncharismatic challenger is certainly true.
So to sum it up, 3 keys certainly down already. 4 keys undecided, although they lean in various ways. To count out the Democrats, 3 of the 4 keys that are not fully decided, third party, social unrest, and the 2 foreign/military keys, 3 of those would have to fall to predict the Democrats' defeat, which is why I've said a lot has to go wrong. And I'm not saying Harris wins yet. I'm not sure That's not mine.
No, it's not.
I am not made a final prediction, but I will soon, in less than a month or so, by the end of the Democratic convention.
That Harris wins is if this model right now, if this update holds true, if all these up in the air keys hold true, then she will win. But we
right,
don't
but
know
I don't buy, as you know, I don't do hypotheticals.
Right. And since our last update in June with Harris coming in, they've lost one key.
They've lost one key, but the third-party key and the social unrest key are looking a little more secure for the Democrats than they were, say, a month or two ago.
Correct.
The more time that goes on and there's no social unrest of a very significant order to shake up the society, that key becomes more secure. And as we've gone on, it looks like RFK Jr. seems to be fading, although I haven't called that key yet. And as you say, we got to find out whether he's on the ballots or not.
Yeah.
We don't know that.
All right. Any final words before we get to questions?
Yes. Again, forget the polls, forget the pundits. Keep your eye on the big picture as gauged by the keys, but make sure you stick to how the keys are defined according to predicting the next president, the keys to the White House 2024, and how in the book the keys are answered from 1860 to 2020. You can freelance if you want, but that's your own prediction system. That's not the keys to the White House. You must stick to the internals of the system if you want to use this system.
All right. I want to give a final shout out to the 13 Keys Tracker. Here in the bottom right corner, you can see you can send them a donation for the hard work that they put in to keep this website up. Okay. Let's get to some questions. Are you excited?
I am very... What time is it now?
6:32.
All right, so we got plenty of time for questions.
Yes, let me get up my handy dandy Google Doc. Okay. Arash Taheri with a $50 donation. They say, Dr. Lichtman, Harris and Biden took a strong stance with Netanyahu to take the deal. Theoretically, do you believe they got him pinned, considering Harris could potentially be president and Netanyahu won't have that friendship presence with Biden?
That's a great question. And, Netanyahu is very belligerent. He's the Donald Trump of Israel and doesn't, give in easily. But you're absolutely right. She's put him in a very difficult position because if she wins, and, as I said, a lot would have to go wrong for her to lose, then Netanyahu's got to deal with her for another 4 years. So she really was very smart in pinning him down in this way. Plus, there's a lot of pressure on him in Israel to do this deal. His popularity is plummeting, and he may decide, as much as he doesn't want to do it, that A, he doesn't want to be in a difficult position with the next U.S. president, and B, he's got to do it to save his own political life in Israel.
Member Christine's 3380 says, if we could ever get rid of the Electoral College, what effect, if any, would it have on the keys?
Wouldn't change the keys, I don't think, but it would make elections much more reflective of the will of the people. I have for a very long time advocated that we need to get rid of the Electoral College. I've said, look, we're the world's longest running democracy, and that's a great thing because we have these strong democratic traditions, but we're also stuck with 18th century institutions, the worst of which is 2 senators for every state, and the Electoral College, which greatly understates populous states and greatly overrepresents small states, and recently seems to confine the election to a handful of swing states. That's a very dysfunctional part of our democracy.
Lacherzar Van Che with the $50 donation. Thank you so much. They say Jim Jordan runs for president as an independent and was polling at 15%. Why would that flip the third party key? That would hurt the Republicans. I've heard some of your critics say that you predicted in 2016 that Trump... Okay, we've talked about that a million times. All right, just talk to the third party Jim Jordan question.
Again, when you read the book, I haven't gone over this because it's not relevant here. I said the one exception to the third party key counting against the White House party, which has never happened, but you raise a hypothetical about a staunch Republican running as an independent. As I said, if in fact that ever was the case, which doesn't have a historical analog, then you would not count the third party key against the White House party, but it would have to be a clear split within the opposition party.
Member Ulan 30 says, in theory, could the incumbent party indefinitely retain the incumbency and contest keys by doing what you called Plan B over and over again every election, which is the president resigns, makes the vice president president, and then they run for president? In theory, they could.
In theory, they could. I think that might get a little bit old, and people would see through it. But that's very smart. We have really, very strategic thinking in our audience.
It'll King with a $5 donation. They say, why don't the keys take into account variables like demographic changes, electoral vote relocation, redistricting, and voter turnout / suppression?
Yes. Well, because the keys are simple, integral parameters that deal with the election as a whole. They don't break it down into the various component parts like you're talking about. There's no way to predict an election by looking at those components. I always use the analogy of your cup of tea. You pour sugar in the tea. You can't learn much by trying to follow the sugar molecules. It's too complicated. But you can learn a lot with simple integral parameters like sweetness and density. Moreover, as I already explained, the keys have held since 1860 through vastly greater changes than any of those which have occurred in recent years and which your question very smartly outlines.
JBBBBBBBBBBB says, Sam, I've never missed an episode, but this is my first comment ever. Well, thank you for commenting. Thanks for making the show happen. You're welcome. I used to have to search around for random little clips to get Allan's take on breaking news, and this format is so much more enjoyable. So that's good.
That's good.
If this channel keeps growing, would you be open to doing a book signing or a proper in-person debate versus someone like Cenk?
I'm definitely not going to debate Cenk.
Yeah.
He's a blowhard. He uses obscenities. People have been calling me. I don't know if they're really associated with Cenk, but they claim they are and shouting obscenities at me. No, I'm going to have nothing to do with that guy. But, with a real scholar, I'd be happy to have a debate. I had one in 2020 with an eminent political scientist, Helmut Norpoth. He and I were the only scholars who had a system that correctly called a Trump victory in 2016. But in our debate in 2020, we fundamentally split. I was predicting, of course, a Biden win. Norpoth was predicting a Trump landslide with some 360 electoral college votes. He overstated it by about 130 or more. He could not have been more wrong. So that left me as the only modeler who got both 2016 and 2020 right. But our debate was very high level, very scholarly, very respectful. We weren't shouting obscenities. We weren't, being blowhards. And I'd be happy to have that kind of debate again.
Underverse, thank you so much for your generous donation. They say, what do you think about going back to one representative per 30,000 people?
I think that's too many. I can't do the math in my head, but that's going to be thousands upon thousands. I think that's too much.
Will Strutchermeyer says, Why were the Republicans considered the incumbent party for the 1868 election in your book on the keys if Andrew Johnson, Democrat, was president at the time?
Andrew Johnson, it was a very complicated situation, and I don't want to go over the whole thing, but while Andrew Johnson was a Democrat, he was filling out the term of a Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, and he had been selected by Lincoln to replace the existing vice president, Hannibal Hamlin, and thus was in effect representing a Republican administration. But, you know, it was very, very complicated post-Civil War situation, and, you know, one could make arguments on both sides.
Hannibal Hamlin, not to be confused with
what did I say?
No, you did say that. Oh. I'm saying not to be confused with Hannibal Lecter, who's
the late great Hannibal Lecter, right?
Which we were discussing. The fictional character did not die in the movies, and the actor who played him, Anthony Hopkins, is not dead. So we're confused why Trump is saying it, but also why he's calling him the late Hannibal Lecter, because neither the fictional character nor the actor is dead.
Can you imagine if Biden had said that? You know, the amount of criticism that would have fallen on their head. The problem with Trump, we become a nerd to Trump. You know, we don't really respond to all the astounding, inflammatory, lying things that Trump says. Oh, it's just Trump. That's, you know, that is the way you get authoritarianism, by discounting what the authoritarian promises and says.
Yeah, now the FBI director has said, quote, they're not quote, but generally has said they're not even sure if Donald Trump was actually shot by a bullet, which he and his allies have been running to the hills with.
I don't think, and it's my opinion, I'm not a ballistics expert, I don't think he was shot with a bullet. We saw a demonstration of someone being shot in the air with a bullet, and their entire ear disintegrated. Exploded, not surprising. And I don't think the FBI director would have said that if he didn't believe that Trump was not shot with a bullet. Otherwise, why would the FBI director even bring that up?
Good point. Still alive. Ironic, since we were talking about whether Hannibal Lecter was alive or not, says, I have a
Who would have thought we'd be talking about Hannibal Lecter at the presidential level? It's just astounding. It just shows how far down Trump has brought our discourse.
It's kind of funny, though.
Yes.
They say, I have a feeling we will see higher voter turnout this election. How does voter turnout affect the keys models, and does a record turnout turn the charisma key?
Well, obviously it doesn't, because that would be after the election, and all these keys predictably have to be turned before the election. And again, the keys have covered 160 years of politics with all kinds of fluctuations in turnout, from very low turnout in the early 20th century to very much higher turnout, for example, in 2016 or in the late 19th century.
Member Patrick Murray says, do you think J.D. Vance will ever have the courage to stand up to Trump like Pence did on January 6th if elected?
I think not, and that makes him a very dangerous choice for vice president. You know, whatever you may think of Pence, he has a strong moral backbone and a strong commitment to American democracy. I don't think J.D. Vance has either.
Harry Chittenden says, who do you think would be the best and worst picks for Kamala's running mate?
I haven't thought about the worst. Probably me, you know. And I can tell you, you know, some of the best, just opinion. Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, a critical state, the governor, that very popular governor that the Democrats must win. I would say a notch below, Governor Roy Cooper of North Carolina, a state that's more difficult for the Democrats to win. A pick I like a lot, but he's not from a swing state, Governor Andy Beshear, who won big in the red state of Kentucky. And then the one non-governor I would look at is the former astronaut, Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona, another swing state, whose wife Gabby Giffords was herself the subject of horrific gun violence that almost took her life. And I would also mention Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, although I'm not sure the Democrats want to run 2 women this time. Not that I'm against it, but I think they may worry about a backlash.
Member Casey Adams says, are there any historical factors similar to the keys that could help Kamala increase the number of House seats in 2026 so she keeps key 1 in 2028?
It's a great question. And there are ways in which Harris could help keep House seats, and that is help raise money for congressional elections. Money is not one of my keys to the presidency, but money does play a role, and I've studied this, in every other election. So to the extent to which Harris could help raise money for Senate and House candidates, and particularly for the House, that would help them keep the mandate key in line. And of course, by winning the election, the top of the ticket does tend to bring up the middle of the ticket for U.S. House.
Starling Reese says, key number 12. Please clarify the difference between Obama 08 and Harris. I'm still waiting for my book to arrive.
Obama 08 was an incredible orator, one of the best we've seen in many decades. It was his oratorical ability that led him to actually become someone who burst onto the national scene. He was this obscure Illinois politician before he made that incredible address in the 2004 Democratic Convention. He also made what I thought was the greatest, since Martin Luther King anyway, the greatest speech on racial issues in America when he was being criticized for some comments made by his pastor. And his theme of hope and change really resonated. So I don't see Harris paralleling Obama from 2008.
Rick Evans says, member Rick Evans says, Kamala Harris has raised over $125 million and has landed numerous celebrity endorsements. Would you care to comment on the extraordinary level of support shown towards her campaign?
It's not a key, but I think it shows that there's a lot of excitement and enthusiasm behind the Harris campaign. And that could indirectly affect the third party key, certainly. If, in fact, some of the energy directed towards Harris is directed away from RFK Jr. as an alternative to the major party candidates.
I want to also do a housekeeping note. There's a Reddit that follows your work. It's our subreddit. It's called 13 Keys. 13 Keys. It's a subreddit. If you're on Reddit, check out our subreddit.
I didn't know that.
I know. Now you know.
Are you suggesting I'm not in the swim?
Yes.
Oh.
Jeff Cousin asks, when you told the story of the 13 keys, I heard you describe it as the discovery of the 13 keys. Can you explain the importance of why the keys are a discovery of patterns and principles as opposed to an invention you created? That's a good question, Jeff.
It's a very good question. And I don't want to, I could take the whole session to answer it.
Don't.
But I will say I didn't create it out of whole cloth. Rather, it resulted from 2 or 3 things. First, collaborating with the world's leading earthquake predictor, Vladimir Kailas-Borak, and then reconceptualizing elections in geophysical terms in 1981, not as Ronald Reagan versus Jimmy Carter, Republican versus Democrat, liberal versus conservative, but as stability, the White House party stays in power, earthquake, the White House party is turned out of power. Then we didn't create the keys. We then looked at every American presidential election from 1860 to 1980, remember this is 1981, using empirically Kailas-Borok's method of pattern recognition to distinguish between stability and earthquake. And the methodology indicated that these set of keys were the best indicators to separate stability from earthquake according to our 6-key decision rules. So this was empirically derived, but like all empirical analyses, it required some conceptualization and reconceptualization as well. We were always guided by my finding from my decades of study that American presidential elections very much reflected the strength and performance of the White House party.
I also want to say thank you all for the donations and your questions. Just want to reiterate, we can't guarantee we can get to all of them. I just want to reiterate that we have so many in line. Thank you, CL Grassi, for your donation. They say, Professor Allan Lichtman totally rocks.
Wow. Did you know that?
Now I do.
Now you do.
For Meto What asks, was Netanyahu trying to interfere with the election, or did he purposely come to cause social unrest key to flip in your keys in the Republicans' favor?
I'm sure.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think he was trying to flip social unrest, but I'm sure he is desperately hoping for a Trump, not a Harris victory, and will do what he can, but he has limited influence. You know, this isn't the Russian disinformation campaign.
Member Noble John says, Professor Lichtman, it feels like it's been a long time since the Democratic Party has been this energized and united behind a candidate. Do you think it was worth the risk to sacrifice the incumbency key?
Maybe. You know, it's hard to say. I hate to do hypotheticals, as you know, but what I have said is sacrificing the incumbency does not fundamentally change the political landscape as gauged by the keys, and quite possibly the enthusiasm from a new, younger candidate could indirectly affect the third-party key and possibly the social unrest key. It may make it less likely people want to turn to RFK Jr. and less likely there's going to be a big explosion of protest at the Democratic convention.
Kent Sang says, does Biden's executive order on immigration hurt the major policy change key?
No, not at all. That was already locked in before that.
Okay, one second. George Miller says, just a suggestion, you should consider making a documentary about your repealing the Second Amendment. I think this will help get your message across better because people watch TV more than reading.
I agree. And if you've got someone out there who's willing to make a documentary, this is my book, Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America, in which I point out how our epidemic of gun violence is unique to the United States among all our peer nations, and how this argument, we believe in the Second Amendment, but has gotten no traction for well over 30 years in curbing the epidemic of violence. And the book goes through the whole history of guns and gun control in America, showing that the greatest hoax ever perpetrated constitutionally on the American people was the notion that the Second Amendment, according to the framers, guaranteed an individual right to keep and bear arms, not a right tied to a well-regulated militia. I'll give you one of like half a dozen facts that I laid out in my book. Who crafted the Second Amendment, Sam?
The person?
The person. Very famous guy. You know him.
Thomas Jefferson?
Close. James Madison.
Okay.
And what did James Madison own?
Slaves.
Slaves. And lots of slaveholders voted for and ratified the Second Amendment. Do you think for one moment slaveholders would have ratified an amendment that gave free black people an unlimited right to keep and bear arms. Of course not. But by tying it to a well-regulated militia, say that fast,
No.
they guaranteed to keep it out of the hands of black people, because were black people allowed in the militia back then?
No.
No. So, that's just one of so many historical facts ignored by those who perpetrated this hoax about the Second Amendment.
Dominique Clark with a £5 donation from
That's more than $5.
all the way from the UK.
That's nice.
Let's hear your best English accent.
No, you don't want.
No, come on.
Cheerio.
No, say more.
Cheerio, old chap.
Okay, not bad.
Stiff upper lip and all.
What? What did you say?
Stiff upper lip.
Oh, stiff upper lip. Gotcha. What are your thoughts?
God save the Queen.
All right, that's enough.
Yeah. I was hoping you would say it was enough.
What are your thoughts on Buttigieg's sexuality if he is the VP pick? Would it be unfortunately detrimental to the Harris vote because of the deep-rooted stigma of many Americans?
Wouldn't affect the keys, and I think the chances of Buttigieg becoming the choice for Harris is essentially zero.
Member Soccer Guy says, "Hi, Allan. I'm confused why you haven't called key 10 yet, which is the foreign/military failure key.
Which way do you think I should call it?
They're saying, wouldn't a failure have already happened?
Not necessarily. I think things are, as you say, in Ukraine are so ambiguous. It's hard to say, and we'll see what happens in Gaza. That situation could change very rapidly. But as I said, it's likely to go against the White House party.
Jordan Johnson wants to know, is this the scariest election of your time?
Yes.
Okay. I like that answer. Short and sweet. Let's see here. Carl Patrick Bolea says, is there a historical model for when an incumbent is pushed off the ticket, as in the case we just saw? Could the huge pressure and outcry to remove Biden and anoint Harris replicate the conditions of the contest key?
No, the contest key is very clear. You've got to stick to the definition of the key. The closest analog we had was when, who's the last president to withdraw from re-election, Sam?
Nixon?
Close.
LBJ.
LBJ.
I get confused. You've asked me that question a few times. I get confused because does that count for Nixon or no?
No, it was LBJ who withdrew. Remember, when Nixon resigned, he was not eligible to run for re-election.
Oh, I see.
Because he was had served 2 terms.
Right.
So LBJ is also pushed out by his own party much earlier in March. The difference is, though, you didn't get a consensus nominee. You had that terrible contest within the Democratic Party that included the assassination of RFK and a lot of opposition to the choice of Hubert Humphrey. Plus, this was the middle of the Vietnam War, and you had an explosion of social unrest. And so what's happened this time is fundamentally different from what went on in the 1960s, the closest analog we can find. You're not getting a contest, and so far it certainly does not look like there'll be an explosion of social unrest.
Arjan Sahota says, you had Clinton in 1996 with 5 negative keys. If Colin Powell is the GOP nominee, would he have been a national hero and turned the 6th fatal key against Bill Clinton?
What do I always say about hypotheticals?
You said you love hypotheticals. You're open to answering them at any time, any place, anywhere.
I think I said just the opposite. Yes. I can't answer hypotheticals because that changes everything. You can't just pull one thing out of history and say, oh, in isolation of everything else, what is going to be the impact? Who knows? And while I certainly thought that Colin Powell at the time had the potential to be a charismatic candidate, I also thought that was true of John Glenn, the great
Who?
astronaut.
Oh,
Right? The first American to orbit the Earth. And he was a disaster as a presidential candidate. So until you're a candidate, you don't know.
member Chris Wall says the Dawes Act that was signed into law by Grover Cleveland is interpreted by some historians as a well-intentioned plan that led to disastrous results, while other historians think it was meant to be destructive to Native Americans. What's your interpretation? That's a left field question.
That is, I'm very familiar with the Dawes Act. I do think it was destructive for Native Americans. I'm not an historian of Native American history, but it's a very, very sad history. And I'm not sure it was explicitly intended to be destructive of Native Americans, but it was, I believe. And again, just take what I have to say with a grain of salt, because that's not my area of specialty. Like almost every other Indian policy, it was designed to benefit white people in America.
Sandwich with a $5 donation.
By the way,
what?
Where else would you get a question about the Dawes Act?
Right. Good point, Dad.
What an audience we have.
What an audience we have. Sandwich with a $5 donation. They say, I found that with a few couple modifications, your keys are very good for predicting governor elections. Okay,
I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
If you actually did an analysis of governor elections, send it on.
80 Mart says, throughout the next term, America will be making trips to and around the moon. How could Senator Kelly, former astronaut, make the ticket more appealing, given the landing was a defining moment under JFK?
I think Kelly is a good choice, but again, it's outside the context of the keys. I don't have a vice presidential key, and there's no evidence that a vice presidential pick has turned or even had a significant influence on an election. I think you've heard me give the example of Dan Quayle, the lightly regarded VP pick for Bush, who a lot of pundits saying would sink the Bush campaign. He suffered the worst beating of any candidate ever in a debate, and Bush went on to win by a near landslide. When Clinton picked Al Gore, people said, why'd you do that? It's just a duplicate of yourself. The two Bubbas adds nothing. And Clinton, of course, went on to win, which surprised a lot of pundits. Dick Cheney was considered a very politically bad pick for George W. Bush, who didn't add anything to the ticket. And, of course, Bush, well, we won't say he won 2000, but became president in 2000. Let's put it that way.
There you
and
go.
Won in 2004 on his own.
There you go.
We can go on and on about vice presidential picks.
Right. Dan the Man, member Dan the Man, says, how will Kamala defend her performance on immigration during the campaign?
I think it's pretty easy. Number one, immigration, migrant contacts are way down in recent months, even lower, I believe, although I'm not expert on this, than at the end of the Trump administration. And Democrats and Republicans, led by Senator Langford, a conservative Republican from Oklahoma, had worked out a deal on border security. And who killed that deal, Sam?
Republicans in Congress.
No.
Oh, Donald Trump.
Donald Trump, without even seeing it, because he wants chaos on the border. He doesn't want a policy solution. And so I think, Harris has some pretty good arguments when it comes to immigration.
Flufuckus with a €5 donation. They say, hello, Dr. Lichtman. I think your method is genius. Would you replace Kamala with Joe Biden if he didn't quit the race?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
I guess they're asking...
I'm not sure what they're asking.
If it was up to you, would you have kept Joe Biden, essentially? Would you take Kamala out and put Joe Biden back in?
Look, it's not up to me. I thought that what the Democrats did on Joe Biden was shameful, and Biden would have ticked off another key. But as we've discussed, there is a new energy and new excitement, which could affect two other keys, third party and social unrest.
Count Blifford, remember Count Blifford says, can you quickly list a few flaws in the Wikipedia page on the keys? I work on that article. I will go fix it.
Yeah, please, were you the person who contacted me? I would like to have you fix it. I don't remember what the flaws are, but I know it's not a great article, and I'd love to have it fixed.
Supposedly Biden dropped out to help the Dems' chances in Congress. Do you think that's true, or did he drop because he has a lack of faith in the keys?
I have no idea what the inside story is on Biden dropping out. Only Biden and maybe a few close advisors know the answer to that. So it would be presumptuous of me or anyone to say they know why Biden dropped out. And it may be multiple reasons. People's motivations are not singular. People often act on many motivations, and motivations that aren't easily and clearly statable.
Good point. Eric Cartenson says, regarding the no primary contest key, is it possible for the incumbent party to have a competitive primary between multiple candidates only if the losing candidates tell their delegates to vote for the presumptive nominee at the convention? Are there any previous examples of this?
That happens all the time, but that's not the definition of the key.
So, no. So, okay. Derek Taylor says, we all know that you are very emotional about Trump and his ability to change democracy. But if the keys say he will win, you will have to predict that, correct?
Of course. I predicted Trump in 2016 against all odds. I was only one of two academic modelers to pick Trump. All of the pollsters, like Nate Silver or the Princeton Consortium, thought Clinton would win anywhere from 75% to 99%. And you can imagine, predicting Donald Trump in 2016 did not make me very popular in 90% plus Democratic Washington, D.C., where I teach. Remember, these are predictions, not endorsements. And I will share with you the secret to being a successful predictor. It's not knowing history, they've got no history. It's not knowing politics, although you got no politics. It's not knowing math, although you got to know math. It's keeping your own personal views out of it. If I predicted according to my own personal views, I'd be wrong half the time. Not right virtually all the time. I'd be useless as a predictor. I predicted Trump in 2016. I predicted Ronald Reagan in 1984. I've predicted over time about as many Republican and Democratic wins. So these are objective predictions. They are not endorsements. They do not, one way or the other, necessarily reflect my own political views.
Stephen Denenberg says, not joking. Could there be a 14th key this election if Taylor Swift in a timely manner endorses the candidate and exhorts her tens of millions of devotees to register and vote?
If who exhorts?
Taylor Swift.
I'd love to have the Taylor Swift key. Maybe it'll, make me as famous as what's her boyfriend, Travis Kelce.
Yeah.
But as you heard me say any number of times, although that one is probably the most attractive I've heard, I don't change the keys on the fly.
Our good friend Cameron Kerr is asking, if Trump surviving an assassination attempt doesn't make him charismatic, then what could possibly meet that criteria?
I've explained what meets that criteria and
Right.
gone over the candidates who are charismatic and why. And there's no evidence that the assassination attempt has caused Trump to suddenly become broadly appealing among Democrats. Still trying to find any Trump Democrats.
Keep Dreaming says, if key 4 is still in effect, which is the third party key, and in play by at least October, would that have an effect on the key turning false?
I'm going to be calling that key before October. Remember, I said I'm making my final prediction after the Democratic convention in late August.
Woodsy says, "Hi, Professor Lichtman. Your keys have opened my eyes on how president elections are won. Could listen to a 10-hour lecture from you talking about anything, not the opera."
Oh, yeah.
Laszlo says, "Incumbency question. You said if Biden resigned, she still doesn't get it. Wasn't clear at what point it's too late."
I didn't say that. I said if Biden resigns and she becomes president, she's the incumbent. Democrats win the incumbency key. They won the incumbency key when Truman took over for Roosevelt, when Johnson took over for Kennedy.
He almost spilled his Coke all over my computer.
And when Ford took over after Nixon resigned.
All right.
It's a binary key. You either are or are not the incumbent.
All right. Rapid fire final questions. You ready?
Yes. How many?
I don't know. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Quickly.
You can fire as many as you want.
What if the Heritage Foundation decides next election they will do everything to flip the keys, a.k.a. instigating social unrest, breaking the economy, etc.?
We'll wait and see. I don't think they have that kind of control.
I'm going to say, that takes a lot of power and control. Yeah. I don't know if any singular organization.
No, I don't think they have that. And I think they're trying to do it now anyway.
Why? Pen on paper says, why do the keys only go back to 1860?
Because that's the beginning of Republican versus Democratic competition. And when you get back much earlier, it's a different system, and the statistics are very hard to come by. So you got to start somewhere, and that's a reasonable starting point.
March 29, I think we answered your question. Kennedy Chandler says, have you ever called the incumbent candidate uncharismatic but been proven wrong after voter turnout or margin of victory?
No.
Okay. We've talked about Gary Johnson in 16. Lane, thank you. Let's see.
This isn't very rapid fire.
With the keys campaigning, doesn't matter to flip a key. Does that mean a candidate could stop campaigning right now and still win?
No. I mean, again, that's one of those hypotheticals. Obviously, the keys are based on history, and if something is so radically different, it could have an effect. So I do not recommend candidates to stop campaigning.
Thank you for your donation.
But I do recommend they change the way they campaign. You've heard me say this before. Stop these negative attacks, these trivialities, these sound bites. Campaign on substance and vision. Then even if you lose, you'll have made your mark on America. And if you win, you will put your party in a better position to win in the next election.
Thank you for your donation. We've answered that before. There's no assuring anything can't change anything. The Supreme Court, for example. Minnesota Loon, with our final question of the night, they said, good evening, Allan, and they spelled your name wrong, even though it's the name of our channel. Sorry.
Don't dump on our audience, Sam. That's not nice.
Sorry. We're returning back to the state governor. The selection of senators improve the political logjam that persists regardless of party in the Oval Office.
Don't understand the question.
I don't understand the question either. Would returning back to the state governor, the selection of senators, improve the law?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes, until the early 20th century, senators were selected by the state legislatures. Terrible, terrible idea, because state legislatures are gerrymandered. They don't represent the will of the people, and it's very undemocratic then to have state legislatures select U.S. senators. That'd be a very bad idea to go back to that.
Afterthought Productions, I see your super chat. Email me at lichtman.sam@gmail.com and we can discuss. All right. What an episode, Dad.
Wow.
Where the keys stand now, just to show people who came in late, this is where our update led us. Any final words for the people, Dad?
Yes. Our update led us to 3 keys down out of 6 needed to predict the incumbent party defeat. 4 keys uncertain, 2 of which seem to be going in favor of the Democrats, 2 of which seem to be going against them. So I reiterate what I've been saying for months. A lot would have to go wrong. It could happen, but a lot would have to go wrong for the Democrats to lose. I have not made a final call yet. I've been misinterpreted a lot on that. I will do so likely after the Democratic convention in late August.
Thank you and good night.
Good night.